8 years ago, I used to write for a newspaper, and I had an editor named Bronson, very old school. Every day, the reporters would gather in this meeting room, this tiny little windowless, terrible meeting room, and each person would name a story idea, what was going to be that day's news. And every time that we named a story idea, Bronson would ask us the same question. What's the BFD? And BFD stood for big freaking deal. Except he didn't use the word freaking. He used a different word. So I want to start this talk by asking that same question. This is a talk about writing well. But why? Why do we care about writing well? Why does it matter? Now, you all are in this room, so by definition, you've self-selected as a crowd of people who are interested in writing well, or at least interested enough in writing well that you're willing to, at 10:30 in the morning, come to this talk as opposed to having coffee and or your first beer of the day. But there are other people not in this room or not at this conference, who might ask why they should care. Why does it matter? And in order to answer that question, I'm going to ask a question that may on the surface sound rhetorical, but underneath is anything but. How many of you think about, if you are a blogger or a podcaster or anybody who has an audience, how many of you think about audience engagement on a weekly, if not daily basis? Show of hands. Excellent. That is what matters. It's not writing per se. We're not trying to write well so that we can win a Pulitzer. We're trying to write well because engagement is what matters. To quote Pat Flynn in a talk that he gave at New Media Expo a few years ago, an engaged audience travels from casual fan up to raving fan. A casual fan is somebody who comes across your blog or whatever platform that you choose to express yourself in, and they find some of your content, and it's kind of interesting, and and that's the end of the story. That's as far as it goes. But when a person is engaged and they move up to raving fan, that's when they read every blog post, and they can't wait for the next one to come out. If you don't post for a while, they send you emails or tweets saying, hey, how come you haven't posted in a while? Are you still alive? Or when's the next one coming out? You know, they read all of your books. They talk about you to all of their friends. They email your posts to people that they know. They're raving fans, not to be confused with rabid fans. That's different. That might need some medical attention. And the reason that a fan moves from casual to raving is often because of the impact that you have made on them. Because if you're only making a tiny impact in somebody's life, then their response to you will also be tiny. But if you've actually made a major change in someone's life, if you've inspired them to take action, if you've made them rethink the way that they invest, or save more, or do something different that has a positive impact on their life, then that causes that relationship to strengthen. And I don't want to make this about money, but because we've got 45 minutes and I need to cut to the chase, the natural, organic consequence of making a major impact in someone's life and having an engaged audience is that your monetization strategy can move from transactional to relational. And here's what I mean by that. If you have a very transactional monetization strategy, then you might be making money by doing things such as sponsored posts, text links, the whole do follow versus no follow conversation. That's a different talk for a different day. If you don't know what I'm talking about, be glad that you don't know what I'm talking about. Banner ads, widgets. There's nothing wrong with making money this way. I have done it. I probably will continue to do it. But this is not how you build a legacy. This is clutter. It's noise. It makes, well, how much impact does this make? By the way, this talk is sponsored by coffee. Again, nothing wrong with making money this way, but this isn't what your Wikipedia page is going to say. But what about relationship-based ways to monetize your platform? One-on-one coaching, for example. That's based on the relationship that you have with your audience. Selling courses, hosting retreats, making speeches, all of these are relationship-based. And the foundation of that is that you have influenced someone, that you've made an impact, and that people, your audience, is engaged with what you have to say. They're engaged with your message. The foundation is trust. That's why engagement matters. And if we accept the premise that engagement with your audience matters, then I would argue that that means that we have to focus on the quality of our writing, because I've made an incredibly unscientific chart. Ooh, engagement matters. Here's my unscientific chart. I believe that the quality, originality, and authenticity of your work has a positive relationship with engagement. Essentially, the better your work and the less replicatable, that's a hard word to pronounce. The better your work and the less replicatable that it is, the more your audience is going to be into it. Now, in the next 45 minutes, I can't necessarily teach you how to have more original thoughts or how to be more yourself, but I can focus on quality, that one aspect, one of those three core principles of how to create engagement. And there's the quality of your work and the quality specifically of your writing that is going to drive your platform forward. Because if that quality doesn't exist, if it's not there, then all of your efforts are a little bit dampened. Bad writing or mediocre writing gets in the way. It's a barrier. If your audience doesn't feel like you've put all of yourself into a post, then they're not going to put all of themselves into reading that post and sharing it with their friends and family and thinking about it later that evening or the following week or the following month. So to break down those barriers and to benefit from the natural income and influence that are the organic results from that, you need to focus on the quality of your writing. You need to get better. In fact, to borrow a phrase from the comedian Steve Martin, you have to become so good they can't ignore you. That was the title. That was not the title. Steve Martin wrote a book called Born Standing Up, in which he talked about his career as a comedian. And time again, when people asked him, how did you become famous? He said, well, I just got so good that they couldn't ignore me. And that was it. That was the key to his success. And that later became used as the title of a book written by Cal Newport around a similar topic. So, how can your writing be so good that people can't ignore it? And the reason that I took the time to establish this from the beginning is because that's the BFD. Before I talk about how to write well, I want to make sure that we all know why we're writing well. It's not so that people can think we're good writers. It's so that our writing doesn't get in the way of what we're trying to say. All right. So how to create funny, informative, long-form articles. I promised a lot in that subheading. Wow. Informative and long-form and funny. I've got 30 minutes. Great. What do these have in common? On the surface, informative and funny seem to almost be, if not at odds with one another, then at the very least unrelated. But there are a couple of common threads. Literally a couple. I'm going to talk about two. There are two common threads between funny and informative and long form. And that common thread is clarity and concision. And that's what the bulk of this next half hour that we have together, 45 minutes that we have together, are going to focus on. How to write with clarity and concision. Because once you nail that, then your articles can be informative, they can be long, they can be funny, they can be whatever you want them to be, because all of it is built on this foundation. Now, by the way, to be absolutely clear, I'm not stating that your articles need to be long form or that they need to be humorous. I'm stating that, because those are stylistic decisions, they're editorial decisions. All I'm saying is that you can write in any way that you want to, as long as that is built on a solid foundation. And that foundation comes from clarity and concision. So, with that said, how do you write more clearly? Well, I'm going to take you through 3 tips, three for clarity and 3 for concision. And after that, we'll cover some of the rules of comedy as well. In terms of how to write more clearly, the first thing that you do, we're really dialing this back, you reduce your message down to its core. Like, let's go back to the fundamental building blocks of a sentence in the English language, and that is subject and verb. We're taking this back to its DNA. So, who, what, person and action. I invest. Person, action. You earn. Person, action. This is just the fundamentals of what's happening. These are complete sentences. And if you can dial every thought down to that, then you know what you're trying to say. And once you know what you're trying to say, you can then build upon it. So we start with this core building block of a sentence, subject, verb. And then you can expand on it. You can start to add the object in, right? So I invest in stocks. You earn interest. He spends cash. She saves money. Okay, these are still complete sentences. They're not long. They're quick. They're to the point. The pacing is tight. And from there, we can build further, but only once we have dialed everything down to here. Because by definition, if you're forming sentences with this basic construct in mind, you're going to be writing active, present tense, active voice, and you're not going to be using more words than absolutely necessary, which is, it may sound counterintuitive, but paradoxically, in order to write long, you must write short, because you cannot write a 10,000 word or 100,000 word blog post or book that contains fluff and filler. People aren't going to read that. But if every word contains meaning and moves the sentence forward, you'll keep that engagement throughout. So here we've got a sentence where we have that fundamental building block established, right? Who does what? I invest in stocks. And then we can add a little bit more detail. But that's only because we have first understood who does what. Now, sometimes the who and the what will be separated based on the detail that we add. So you earn, and then we have a little descriptor that modifies the word interest. That's fine. It's okay to separate these because we still have a well-constructed sentence. What we don't want to have happen is a really convoluted sentence like this. Like, cash is what he uses to pay at restaurants, even though I don't even know what this sentence is saying, and I wrote it. You know, it's so confusing. It's so convoluted. What does this mean? But in order to clean up this sentence, just dial it back to who does what. He spends cash. Okay, now we can add to that. He spends cash where, but what, where. And that's really what we're getting at. You know, here's another example. When she gets a paycheck, she saves money from it. When I start a sentence with a dependent clause, I don't know how to end it. A really dorky joke. So this isn't a long sentence per se, but it's not a very well-constructed one because we're deep into the sentence. We're practically at the end of the sentence before we even know who we're talking about or what the action is. So again, dial this back to subject-verb. She saves money. That's what's happening. That's the core of this sentence. I know I'm taking you back to like second grade English here, but that's really what good writing is about. We've, over time, especially if you've been trained on any type of like academic journal writing, really lost touch with how to, the fundamentals of good writing. And so a lot of this is just going back to that elementary school, how to build a sentence. All right, so that's the first tip on how to write with more clarity. The second tip is to break your sentences apart. You don't want very many 20-word, 25-word, 30-word sentences. You want to keep these sentences ideally with a single-digit word count. Now, that's a generalized rule of thumb. That's not, it depends on what you're writing. But here, let's look at an example, right? It's a very long sentence. After watching a documentary about the financial crisis, she got an idea for a business, and that very weekend she wrote a business plan. Okay, that was 27 words. That was 24 words, I lied. That was 24 words. But what if we broke this apart a little bit? She watched a documentary about the financial crisis. Inspiration struck midway through. She wrote a business plan that weekend. You can hear the pacing. You can hear the timing. You move through the sentence faster. And as a result, you, as a reader, just get carried through that writing. 8 words, 4 words, 7 words. The pacing is better. The flow is better. So that's a second tip on how to write with more clarity. Shorter sentences with only the words that matter. The third tip, and this is kind of an indicator of a red flag, is to beware of the word it. That's not to say that the word it is bad, but just that when you are editing, look out for that word because it's often a red flag. So I'll give you 2 examples. If you can fit it in your pantry, that would be the ideal place to store your Costco supplies. Okay, not a great sentence. We can reconstruct this. So the reason this is not a great sentence is because we don't know what's happening. If you can fit it, there's not a lot of clarity there. Rework that sentence, and all of a sudden everything becomes much more clear, and the sentence becomes shorter. The thing is, you want to be incredibly frugal with your words. We'll talk about this more when we cover concision, but clarity and concision are so closely related that you'll see them both overlap. You can trim the sentence down, get rid of the it, and move the reader through. That isn't to say, though, that you should never have the word it in your writing. So, like, when it is ready, I'll have a cup of coffee. The it is a red flag that we might want to reconstruct this sentence, but, I'll have a cup of coffee when it's ready. We can keep the it there. You could also just trim that sentence down to, I'll have a cup of coffee. Oh, that's a good idea, actually. Cup of coffee. So being conscientious about the words like it, and also words like do, have, be. When you're editing, look for those words in your writing, and anytime you see those words, ask yourself if you could reconstruct that sentence. So those are the 3 tips on how to write more clearly. Reduce your sentence down to its core, break apart long sentences, and look for red flag words like it. All right, that's how to write more clearly. What about how to be more concise? Clarity and concision are very related, but I'm going to take you through a few tips on how to write with concision. And first, I'd like to ask a question. Which of the following is more concise? A 500-word blog post, a 50,000-word blog post, or not applicable, I have not given you enough information? Who thinks the answer is A? Anyone? Who thinks the answer is B? And who thinks the answer is C? Awesome. Excellent. Why? Why is C the answer? Yes?
Well, I mean, it really depends on the topic and what kind of depth you're going into with that topic. Because, if you want to write about retirement 50,000 words, should cover it nicely. It just really depends.
Exactly. It is a 50,000 word blog post that's 200,000 words dialed down to their 50,000 word essence. That's an excellent post. That's a super concise post. But saying in 500 words what you could have said in 100, not concise. So there is no correlation between word count and concision. And that's something that often gets confused. Those two concepts often get conflated. A lot of people think that concise writing means keep it to 700 words. Really, it just means be frugal with your words. Imagine that every word costs you $1 and ask yourself if that word is worth $1. Would you pay to have that word? Because if you were a publisher, you might be paying by the word. A lot of people who pay freelance writers pay by the word. So does that word merit the money that it costs? If the answer is no, cut it. Sol Stein, he's a great American editor. He wrote a book called Stein on Writing, which I highly recommend. The whole book is just about cutting out extraneous words. So he talks about the power of strengthening text just by removing that padding, removing the fluff, slaughtering the fluff. So let's walk through some examples. It's important to be careful when you choose a mutual fund. Does anyone have any idea on how we can cut this down? All right, let me ask you some. Yes?
Be careful when you choose a mutual fund.
Yes, exactly. Be careful when you choose a mutual fund. Why? Why did we cut those words? Exactly. So he said it seems self-evident. If I am making a statement, then I'm making that statement because I probably think that it's important. So that doesn't need to be said. It's self-evident. You can cut it. I don't find that to be one bit necessary. Any ideas on how we can shorten that? Exactly. It's not necessary. That's not necessary. All right, let's try another one. This makes it sort of a pain. Exactly. It's a pain. I do have to conclude that I should save for retirement. Any ideas? How do we shorten this? I should save for retirement. All right, let's try one more. But what I do have is a... Exactly. I have. Or I have a... Here's one. Here's a monster. They have a greater number of dollars exposed to stock risk exactly when they're at the age at which they're least able to... Okay, I've run out of breath. You can... Any ideas on how we can really do? There's going to be many right answers on this one. Does anybody have any ideas on how we can restructure this sentence to say effectively the same thing but with far fewer words? Oh, by the way, this is a 27-word sentence. Yes, Gwen.
At the age they are least able to recover from wipeout, they have a greater number of dollars.
Okay. What's another way of saying a greater number? More. More.
They are most exposed when they're least able to recover.
Yes. Awesome. What's your name? Cheryl. Yes. That's exactly right. They have more stock exposure when they're less or least able to recover. I actually went back and forth on the less versus least thing. Took like half an hour of my life. Here's another one. This is one of my favorites. 12 rescue ambulances stood by, waiting to rush injured people to nearby hospitals. Let's break this down word by word. All right? 12. Is that word necessary? Why or why not? Yes. Yes, it is necessary. It gives context. It gives us information that we otherwise would not have. Rescue. Is that word necessary? Why not? Exactly. It is implied in ambulances. Ambulances. Is that necessary? Okay. All right. Stood by? No. Okay, why not? Okay, one or the other. So either stood by or waiting. Okay, so I guess we've got the answer to the waiting. So either stood by or waiting. To rush injured people. Yeah, exactly. Who said that? That's what they do? Yes, absolutely. That is what they do. They rush injured and or sick people. If they were picking up healthy people, I would want to know. To nearby. Is nearby necessary? Why not?
Because they don't go to far hospitals.
Exactly. They're not going to take you to a hospital in Kazakhstan. Hospitals. Is hospitals necessary? Why not? That's where they go. They're not going to take you to In-N-Out Burger. They're definitely not going to take you to the In-N-Out Burger in Kazakhstan when you're healthy. 12 ambulances stood by. We have just turned that sentence into this. And that is how you write long-form posts. So tip number 2 on how to write more concisely is to question adjectives. This actually caught me by surprise. I only learned this recently. Because I don't know about you, but much of what I was taught when I was in high school was that adjectives are beautiful. They're great. They're wonderful and spectacular. But apparently they're also very often not useful. So 12 rescue ambulances, that's an adjective. But by the way, an adjective is a word that modifies a noun. So rescue ambulances, it's an adjective, but it's not a necessary one because rescue is implied. A better adjective would be 12 broken ambulances because, well, I guess we don't want a broken ambulance, but it's certainly a better, because it gives you meaning that you otherwise wouldn't have known. 12 neon green ambulances. That's cool. Not only does it tell me something I otherwise wouldn't have known, it's also visual. So we get a twofer there. 12 homicidal ambulances. I don't know what that means, but I am going to keep reading to the end of that sentence because I want to know how that sentence ends. Those are adjectives that are worth keeping in the way that rescue ambulances is not. So 12 homicidal ambulances race towards the edge of a 42-foot cliff. Okay, I'm going to keep reading. I am not going to, notice some clickbait article about Miley Cyrus and, leave midway down the page. I want to know the end of that story. And it's because, well, other than the topic matter, homicidal ambulances, 42-foot cliff. Cool. 42-foot gives me information about the cliff. It allows me to visualize it. That's good. We can keep that in. Let's talk about something that you might actually write. Hire an experienced financial planner. Do we need to say that this financial planner is experienced? No? Yeah. Yeah? What? Okay. Why might we want to say that the financial planner is experienced?
The level of experience matters. Knowledge on product or being able to actually help me solidify my, financial foundation. Not everyone is equal in terms of good practice.
But what qualifies as experienced, right? If I've had experience for the past year, I'm experienced. But if I've had experience for 20 years, that's entirely different. You don't know that in this sense.
Yes. Yeah. I agree with Nick. I say that experience tells you nothing. Now, if the financial planner was inexperienced, and your sentence for some reason was please hire an inexperienced financial planner. Okay, cool. That is that's an unusual sentence. But I would argue, at least, that if you're telling someone to hire a financial planner, then it shouldn't need to be said that you mean hire a financial planner who has experience. And if you want to clarify it further, if you want to say hire a financial planner who's experienced in this particular niche, or who's experienced in your particular geographic location, okay, that actually gives us information. So hire a financial planner, that's the backbone of the sentence. And then we can say hire a German-speaking, hire a fee-only, hire someone who's grumpy, you know? Then we can add those words that add additional meaning, or that create additional meaning, because that drives the sentence forward. So when do you keep an adjective and when do you not? Solstein suggests 3 rules, which often overlap. One is to keep an adjective when it is necessary for the meaning of the sentence. So hire a grumpy financial planner. That adjective is necessary because it changes the meaning of the sentence. We want a planner who is grumpy. I don't know why, but that's what we want. Keep an adjective if it creates curiosity. So, she had a dubious expression. The sentence could just say she had an expression, but dubious, it actually does 2 things. It does add meaning to the sentence that we otherwise wouldn't have had. It also keeps us curious. Why was her expression dubious? And we can keep an adjective if it adds a visual. So the contractor left his invoice on the chipped countertop. Strictly speaking, the word chipped isn't necessary, but it makes the sentence more visual, and actually it adds a little bit of curiosity. Like, was the contractor's job to fix the countertop or install the countertop? Because if so, you know, now I'm curious. Now I want to read more. What's going on here? So that tip number 2 was to question adjectives. Tip 3 on how to write concisely is to strengthen your verbs. Verbs are the powerhouse of your sentence. So we don't want to pay off debt. We want to crush debt. We want to kill debt. We want to slaughter debt. We want to choke debt. I don't know, this is getting kind of violent. Quit work, you know. That's much more powerful than resign from work or submit your termination letter to work. Challenge everything. These are strong verbs, and strong verbs evoke emotion. And that's what you want to do with your writing. You don't want to emote, you want to evoke. And you can do that in large part through verbs. So, if you're writing a bullet point list, start each bullet with a verb because it cuts to the chase. For example, I'll just let you read that. This is what we'll all be doing tonight. See you at the Trade King party. Here's a hack. If you want to strengthen your verbs, oftentimes it helps, we're going to get violent again, it helps to kill your adverbs. Now, an adverb is a word that modifies a verb. So just to be clear, an adjective modifies a noun, an adverb modifies a verb. If your verb needs to be modified, your verb sucks. You can quote me on that. That's a tweetable. Your verb sucks at Afford Anything. You don't need an adverb 9 times out of 10. You just need a stronger verb. Now, as a general rule of thumb, an adverb is a word that's going to end in an ly. So here's an example. He shut the door firmly. Oh, he shut the door firmly. He slammed the door. Again, firmly. And when you write a rough draft, you're dumping things out of your brain. Ernest Hemingway has a quote, I'm not going to cuss, I'm really not going to cuss. But Ernest Hemingway has a quote where he says, the first draft is bleep. And that's fine. Your first draft, my first drafts are just like nothing but adverbs everywhere. And when I go back through and I edit, every time I see an adverb, I take it as a sign from the universe that I need a stronger verb. She really, truly wants to be debt-free. Come on, you can do better. She craves debt freedom. She yearns for it. She thirsts for it. That's so much more powerful than saying, oh, she really wants it. So concise writing starts with slaughtering the fluff, getting rid of any word that you wouldn't pay money to keep, questioning your adjectives, and killing your adverbs, which will help you strengthen your verbs. That is how you write more concisely. And you can see the overlap between concision and clarity. And the reason, again, back to the what's the BFD, the reason that both of these matter is because if you want to write long form, your readers are not going to stick around until the end unless you have clarity and concision throughout that post. Because that clarity and that concision is what keeps the pacing going. It's what drives people through the story. And without that pacing, people are going to fall off. So, we've established clarity. We've established concision. I want to round out with our third piece of this, which is now how to add some humor, if that's what you choose to do. Again, not saying you have to, but if you want to be funny, ironically, I feel like this talk is like, it's not that funny. I'm like, these are the rules of grammar. Let's talk about your adverbs. But humor writing is actually very much also about mechanics and about rules. So we're going to cover some of those right now. So what the core of humor is the element of surprise. And surprise comes often by first creating a pattern and then destroying it. If you imagine the visual that I always keep in my mind is the capital letter L. So you take your readers down a journey. You know, they're on this path. They're traversing that long line of the L. And then all of a sudden, they bank 90 degrees. And you just swerve them into a completely new direction. And it is the surprise that happens when you do that that makes things, that oftentimes makes something funny. So here's an example, and it uses a classic, perhaps the most famous rule of humor called the rule of three, which is where you set up two conditions that are the same. So you create a pattern with the first two, and then you break that pattern in the third. And you can do this for a lot of intros. It's just a great blog post intro. So let's make a few predictions about next year. Your Aunt Edna will get caught up in another celebrity obsession. Your cousin Billy will embarrass himself at Thanksgiving again. And your taxes will skyrocket. Those are my predictions for next year. So it's a catchy, it's a grabby intro for a blog post. A blog post about taxes going up next year. I mean, the topic of this blog post, the next sentence very well could be, the city of Los Angeles just announced that property tax rates will increase by 80,000% next year. That could very well be sentence number 5. But it's an interesting blog post, but it's an interesting article because it starts with a funny, relatable, and very visual hook. So, and notice how the principles of good writing play out in this. That's why I talked about clarity and concision first, because when you break this down, your Aunt Edna will get caught in another celebrity obsession. We've got the subject, we've got the action, we've got the object, we have a clear, concise sentence with good pacing, and we have that. We need to kind of have that foundation built, because otherwise the joke gets lost in all of the wording. Your cousin Billy will embarrass himself at Thanksgiving. The subject, the action, the object. And then we have the punchline. All right, another rule of humor writing is called is hyperbole. It's just humor through exaggeration. So, for example, if my student loan balance grows any larger, it'll get its own zip code. It's obviously an exaggeration, but it's funny. It adds a little bit of levity to a conversation about student loan balances. Conversely, understatement can do the same thing. So here's an example. This comes from a man by the name of Ken Levine. He was a writer for the show Cheers. And so this is what he wrote on his blog. He said, a couple of years ago, Cheers won the Heritage Award from the TV Critics Association. I was asked to accept the award on their behalf at the big dinner. There was alcohol, so I said sure. He makes it funny because of that understatement. And again, we see a bit of the rule of three here. You know, the first two sentences set us up. We think we know the tone. We think we know where this is going. And then he surprises us in that third line with an understatement. This one, the K rule, this has changed the way that I think about words, quite honestly, especially when I'm trying to write jokes. I don't know why this is the case, but words with any type of a K sound, it doesn't need to have the letter K, any kind of a K sound is a better punchline than a word without. So, for example, if you're writing a punchline, Coke is funnier than Pepsi. Cadillac, funnier than Tesla. And Kardashian, funnier than Hilton. I don't know why, but this is a very established rule. I have a theory about it. I think that it's just because the element of surprise is so important to humor writing, that short, punchy words, they quicken the surprise in a way that a long, drawn-out sound, like like the Pepsi, takes you so long to say that word versus Coke. But for whatever reason, the K rule is just, it's critical. Critical with a K. There's another one. Oh, I practiced how to pronounce that before the speech. We'll pretend that I know how to pronounce that. And that is a humor writing rule. This is the last one that I'm going to take you through, and then I'll open this up to questions. It's a humor writing rule in which you change the second half of the sentence. You add an element of surprise there in such a way that it changes the reader's understanding of your initial setup. So here are a few examples. This first one is from comedian Bill Hicks. He says, I sleep 8 hours a day and 10 at night. And again, he added surprise in the second half of the sentence that causes us to reinterpret what we understand about that first part. Sure. The second half of the sentence is surprising in a way that causes the reader to reinterpret the first. Or creates surprise in a way that causes the reader to reinterpret the first. So here, when we see the first half of the sentence, we think that we know where this is going. We think that he's telling us that he sleeps 8 hours per 24-hour period. But then, boom, he lays an element of surprise there, and it reframes our understanding of what he just said. Here's another one. This is from Stephen Colbert. He was reading this graph. He's looking at it. There's lines. There's an XY axis, and he's studying it very closely. And he's like, okay, if I'm reading this graph correctly, I'd be very surprised. And I will close this talk out with a quote from one of my heroes, Homer Simpson. who he got up in front of a crowd very similar to this one. You know, audience. He stood at a podium, very much like the one that I'm standing at. And he gets up, and he gets the crowd's attention. And he says, you know, if I could just say a few words, I'd be a better public speaker.